All right, everybody, welcome to part 4 of the Reddit build. My name is Shadi, and if you are new here, this is part 4 of a multi-part series I am doing, so please check out part 1. It is somewhere available at the top of the screen. Also, I have created a Discord server for anyone to join to get direct access to me to ask questions about the project or really about anything, so please join that. The link is in the description. I would love to see you in there. Okay, so last time we made a lot of progress. We were able to create communities. We were able to store those communities in our Firestore database, and we actually got to see the ins and outs of Firestore, how to create documents and collections using the functions provided by Firestore. And we were able to model our data so that we know which communities each user is in. And so we're just going to keep building on top of this, and we are starting to get into the most exciting parts of this project. So I'm super excited, and I hope you are as well. So where we left off last time was we created this really useful page content layout component that we can reuse on all of our pages to create this left-hand side, right-hand side layout that Reddit has, and we made it responsive so that we only have to write these styles once, and we use that on our community page here. And we also created our header component inside of our community page, which shows the community name, eventually the image of that community, and we have this join leave button here that we created. However, right now, this button does not do anything. It's just an empty function, and it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to. So what this button is supposed to do is join this user to the community if they are not in it, and remove them from the community if they are in it. But in order to know which one of those two things to do, we do need to know if they're already in the community. Therefore, we need access to the user's community snippets, which we created. So even though we are successfully storing the community snippet data in our database, meaning that we do know which communities this user is in, we currently do not have this community snippet data on our front end. So our front end actually has no idea if I'm in this community or not. Only our database does. So what we need to do is actually go and get those community snippets from our database so that we know if the user is actually currently in this community. And we also need access to this data inside of our drop-down menu so that we know our own communities. So clearly we can see that multiple components in our app need access to this community snippet data. Our header does so that we can either join or leave. Our drop-down menu does so that we know what communities we're actually in. And if we go to our homepage, this top communities component does as well. It knows which one of these we're actually in. So we need this data across multiple components. So therefore, we are going to put this community snippet data into a Recoil Atom so that we have access to it globally. And last time, if you remember, I briefly created this file called communitiesatom.ts. I only defined the interface for a community last time. We didn't actually create the atom, so we're going to do that now. So just like our auth modal atom, we can define some interfaces in here that are going to help make our code more robust and prevent errors. So what I'm going to do is create a TypeScript interface to actually model our community state so we know exactly what's supposed to be in it. Inside of our community state, we're going to store those snippets in an array called mySnippets. So we're going to go and get the user's community snippets from the database and store them in this array. And that way we will have access to them throughout all of these components that I referred to just a second ago. And we can actually make this better by specifying what type the things inside of this array actually are. Rather than just saying that they can be anything, we can tell it, okay, well, this is going to be an array of strings, or this is going to be an array of Booleans. We can specify what's going to be inside of this array. And each thing inside of this array is going to be a community snippet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an interface that represents what a community snippet actually looks like. Now, if you recall from our create community modal, our community snippet is going to have a community ID and an isModerator key, which is going to be present only if we created this community. So what I can do is come back here and I can say, okay, well, our community snippet is going to have a community ID of type string. It's going to have an optional isModerator key, optional because it's only going to be there if we created the community ourselves. And we're going to put the image URL as well. And I'm going to make this optional to start off because we are not going to implement this initially. And I do not want TypeScript to get mad at me. I'm just going to make it optional for now. So now we can come down here and say, okay, well, we know that everything inside of this array is going to be of type community snippet. And we're going to see how useful this is when we actually start working and building these components that are accessing this data. And in a little bit, we are going to come back here and add another property to our community state called visited communities, which is going to act as sort of a cache of all of the communities we visited so we don't have to go refetch that data, but we're going to come back to that in a bit. Basically, we just want to store any data that is global and community related in this community state atom that we're going to create. For now, we're only going to have the mySnippets data inside of our community state. So now let's actually create the Recoil Atom for our community state. So I'm going to say export const community state is going to be equal to a Recoil Atom. And the type of that community state is going to be the community state interface that we just defined up top. So our key is going to be communities state, and this is the unique identifier that is required by Recoil. And we also need to give it a default value. And the value of our state needs to be of type community state. We cannot just give it anything. Like if we gave it a string, it's going to complain and say, well, string is not assignable to type community state because that's what we're telling it the type of the value is. So we can actually create a variable that represents the default community state. I'm going to say default community state, and this is going to be of type community state so that the types actually match. And inside of here, we're just going to have my snippets, and we're going to initialize this as an empty array. So it's going to start off as empty, then we're going to go get that data from our database, and then store it inside of this array. Then down here, to make TypeScript happy again, we can say default community state. So now the types match, and we are good to go. All right, you guys, now that we have defined our community state atom, we are able to access our community state data globally, and we can grab the snippet data wherever we need it. And we saw that the main components that we're going to need it is in this top communities component, our drop-down menu, and then as well as in the headers of our community pages. So we have clearly established that this community snippet data definitely needs to be global. But let's take this one step further. If we look at this top communities component, we can see that we can join and leave communities from within here. So we're calling some sort of function that is responsible for joining and leaving whatever one we click on. And we also have that same exact functionality inside of our header component in a specific community page. So not only is our community snippet data required by both of these components, the functionality for actually joining and leaving a community is shared by them as well. So in React, when we have this sort of scenario where we need data as well as certain functionality shared across global components, we can create what is called a custom hook. And in the custom hook, we can put state and logic that is repeated across our app. And we can use this custom hook in any component that requires this repeated functionality in the same exact way as we would use a native React hook like useState or useEffect. So let me explain this with a diagram. So I created this diagram here of what it is that we're going to create. So we're going to create a custom hook that is called useCommunityData. So basically, this diagram represents the data flow of this custom hook. And so this hook is going to contain any community-related data or functions that we need across multiple components. So we've already established that we clearly need community state across multiple components, right? We need those snippets, and the community state contains those snippets. So we can put our community state in this hook. We also need the functionality of joining and leaving communities across two different components. And those two components in this case are header as well as the top communities component. And then inside of these components, all we need to do is just grab the specific pieces of this global data that we need by using the exact same hook. And this is really good architecture because it keeps our code dry, it prevents us from writing the same functionality multiple times, and it just makes the code overall better quality. That way we don't have to define the same functions over and over in all the places that we need it. We just have to do it one single time. And I created this diagram to model what our situation looks like to hopefully make it more clear as to why we are using a custom hook. But the main takeaway here is to just understand that in React, when you have repeated logic or repeated data that is required in multiple places, you can extract all that stuff, put it into a single place, which is a hook, and then call that hook from wherever the stuff is needed. I do hope that makes sense, and it will become more clear as we actually write the code for this. So let's actually go and implement that diagram in code, and then we can refer back to it once we have done that to solidify this entire concept. Okay, so let's actually create this custom hook. So inside of our source folder, I'm going to create another folder called hooks, and then I'm going to create a file inside of here called useCommunityData. And if you've never written a custom hook before, it does have to start with the word use, just like all their other hooks, useState, useEffect. It is a requirement by React. Okay, so let's begin writing out this skeleton for this custom hook to hopefully solidify that diagram if it was not clear from the beginning. So this hook is not going to take in any props, so we can just remove that. So this is where our recoil community state is going to live. So we're going to say const community state value set community state value is equal to use recoil state. And remember that this recoil hook requires us to pass the atom that we want to get from recoil. And the atom that we're pulling from is our community state atom, which makes sure that imports from atom/communities atom. Now, our custom hook is not going to return any HTML like any other component. It is going to return an object that contains data and functions. And the stuff that we put in this object that we're returning is what's going to be accessible by the other components that actually use this hook. So we have definitely established that we want community state value available across many components. So let's put that inside of this object. So let's define the functions that are going to be shared across components. So one of those functions, if you recall, needs to actually join the user to the community. So let's put that in here. Let's create a function called join community. And we will leave it empty for now. And we also need leave community. So now I can also add these functions to this object so that they're accessible by the components that call this hook. And since this hook is not returning a functional component, we're going to remove this return type here. Okay, so now let's talk about how to actually call this hook and get access to this stuff in the components that need it. So let's go to our header and let's import our new custom hook. Import useCommunityData from, go up to directories, hooks, useCommunityData. Awesome. Now inside of our component, the way we're actually going to call our hook is pretty much the exact same way we would call any other React hook. We would say const, I'm going to leave it empty just for a second, and I'm going to say this is equal to useCommunityData. Okay, well now we can grab any of those three things that we were returning out of our hook. Remember we had community state value, join community, leave community. Well now we can grab that from inside of here. So let's grab community state value. And now we have access to that recoil state in our header component. And we can also grab those two functions, join and leave community. So let's go back to our hook. Now I'm going to create a function that is going to decide which of these two functions to call. And this will become clear why in just a second, so bear with me. So I'm going to say const on join or leave community. All right, now this function is going to take in two arguments. The first one is going to be the actual data of the community that we are trying to join or leave, and this is going to be of type community, which we will need to import from that same communities Atom file. And the second argument is going to be a variable called isJoined, and this is going to be a Boolean representing if we are joined into this community or not. Okay, and I'm just going to close my directory so I have more room. And so inside of this function, the first thing we're actually going to check is the user signed in? And if they're not signed in, we want to open up the auth modal and prompt them to sign in, because you can only join or leave communities if you are signed in. And since our auth modal state is global, we can totally do that here. And this is another reason why I made that state global. So hopefully that's more clear now if it wasn't before. And we will implement this in just a few minutes, but let's just get it working for a signed in user first. So if they are signed in, the next thing we want to do is check, are they joined into this community? If they are, and they click on that button, that means they must be leaving the community. So we're going to call our leave community function, and we're going to pass in the ID of this particular community. So down here, we just need to indicate in our leave community declaration that we are accepting the community ID, and the type of that is a string. Okay, perfect. And if we do that, we can just return out of this function because we do not want to proceed. So if we make it past that, that means the user is going to be joining the community. So we're going to call our function join community, and we're going to pass all of our community data to this function because we're going to need more than just the ID inside of it. So I'm going to go down here and add that to the declaration, and that is going to be of type community. So now down here, rather than having to return both of these two functions separately, we can just return the single one on join or leave community. And this is the function that our header and top communities component is going to call. So now let's go to our header, pull that function in from our hook. So on join or leave community. And then down here is where we actually want to call it on this button here. So we can say on join or leave community, and we want to pass in that community data and also our isJoined variable that we have already defined. If you remember, our isJoined thing, we just declared as false because we did not have access to our community state value yet, but now that we do, let's make this proper. Let's actually read from our community snippets. So since my snippets is an array that represents the communities that the user is currently in, we can search through this array and try to find a snippet where the ID matches the ID of community data, which in this case is the data for the community Shaddy's group. If we can find one, that means that this user has indeed joined this community. And if we cannot, then they have not joined. So what that looks like is this. We can say community state value dot my snippets dot find. And the find function is a higher order array method that we can use to loop through an array to see if a specific item matches some condition. And the condition that we're looking for in this case is if item.communityID is equal to this communitydata.id. If the find function does find a snippet that matches, which in this case would be a snippet with an ID of Shaddy's group, it's going to return that snippet. If it does not find it, it's going to return undefined. And you can see down here that this function is not happy because isJoined is supposed to be a Boolean, but right now it's either going to be a snippet or undefined. And the way to fix that is we can just add a double bang operator in front of this entire thing, and that is just going to Booleanize it to make it true or false. It's going to behave the exact same way, but now it's just a Boolean. Okay, so now that is happy. Okay, so now all we need to do is go and fetch the user's community snippets from the database and store them inside of this MySnippets array. So let's do that. And we're going to put that logic inside of our hook here. Okay, so let's create a function called getMySnippets. And this is going to be asynchronous because we need to communicate with our database, which is asynchronous. And inside of here, I'm going to create a try-catch block to help us with our error handling. So if there's an error, I'm going to say getMySnippets error and log the error. And I'm also going to come up here and create some loading and error state. So I'm going to say loading, set loading is equal to use state, false, and error and set error is going to be initialized as an empty string, as usual. Perfect. Okay, so just before our try block, I'm going to set loading to be true, as we are waiting for our snippets to come back from the database. And inside of here, we're actually going to go get this user snippets. So because we are getting the snippets for the currently logged in user, we need access to that currently logged in user. So let's come up here and grab that from the hook we've seen before, use auth state. Pass it our auth object from client app as usual. And now let's come down here. Now let's actually communicate with our Firestore database and grab all of the documents inside of this community snippet collection for this current user. So how we're going to do that is we're going to say const snippet docs is going to be equal to await get docs, again coming from Firestore. And inside of this function, we need to pass it a collection reference so that it knows which collection to get all these documents from. And that collection is going to be a collection object from Firestore. And we need to pass this our Firestore object. So the path to the collection that we want to get all of these documents from is going to be users. Then outside of the users, we want to go into this currently logged in users user ID document. Then on that particular user, we want to grab everything from the community snippets sub-collection. So that is the path to that collection. Let's save this. Firestore is going to return an array of objects of all the documents inside of that collection. And what we want to do is take those documents and extract all of the data from each one and then store it in MySnippets inside of community state value. And we can do that using the set community state value function. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable called const snippets, and we're going to take those snippet docs returned from Firebase, and so you'll notice that there is a property called the docs provided by Firestore, and this is going to allow us to iterate through these docs and convert them into JavaScript objects to store into state. So we can say .docs and then .map, and then for each doc, we want to basically create a JavaScript object and extract all of the data out of that document. So this is how we do that. So again, we are looping through all of those docs returned by Firebase and then mapping them or converting them into objects with all of the data extracted from each document. So to clarify this, let's just log snippets to see what they actually look like. Okay, so let's go to our console and let's just refresh this page. So I was trying to figure out why it wasn't showing up in the console, and it's because I'm not even calling the function, so that's probably why. So what we need to do is actually call the function. So we are going to call this function as soon as the application loads and the DOM mounts. And the way to do that is like we would in any other component with a use effect. We can use the same exact methods in our hook as we would in a regular component. And inside of this use effect, all we need to do is call that getMySnippets function. But there's something we need to watch out for here. And that is that since we are getting snippets for a specific user, we don't really want to call this function until we have an actual user ID returned from this useAuthState hook. If we proceed like this, there's going to be a data race, and this could potentially be called before the user actually comes in from that hook, which would result in this being undefined, and we just don't want to do that. It's kind of not a good idea. So a way to protect against that is to just add a dependency inside of this use effect of user. That way this hook is going to trigger every time user changes. And then what we can do is at the very top of our use effect, we can just prevent this function from being called if there is no user. So we can just say if there is no user, then return out of this function because there is no user to get snippets for. And this is a very common thing to do in React if your functions that you're calling from inside of your use effect depend on this thing being valid. So we're basically just saying, oh, okay, like the user is undefined, get out of this function, don't proceed. And then if the user does become defined, say they log in, use auth hook, finally loads the data from the auth service, then it's going to pass this, and then we will call getMySnippets, which will ensure that we are getting valid snippet documents. Okay, so now we can see that in our console, we actually are getting those snippets. So if I expand this here, we can see that this is coming directly from the database, and these are the snippets for this particularly logged in user, which is my shadmerhi@gmail.com, right? In our database, there is Shaddy's group, is moderator true, and that is what we are seeing on the front end here. So this is just currently an array of one community snippet because shadmerhi@gmail.com is only in one community right now, Shaddy's group. If I was in 10, there would be 10. Okay, so now all we have to do is take these snippets and put them into our community state value .mysnippets, and then we will actually have a valid way to check if I'm in this community or not. So let's do that, and we're going to see that this button is actually going to show us whether or not we're in here. Okay, so let's go back to here, and let's put these snippets inside of state. So what we're going to do is we're going to call that set community state value because that's the state that we're updating. I'm going to take the previous state and spread it, because the only thing we're modifying is my snippets. Thanks to TypeScript, we have this nice IntelliSense here. And what we're doing is we're just going to set my snippets to be snippets. So we are going to get a TypeScript compiler error here, and this is due to some discrepancies between the types with call signatures. So the way to solve this would be to just typecast the snippets to be an array of community snippets. And we have an interface defined for community snippets in this file. We just need to import it into that other file. So I'm just going to export it out of here. And now inside of useCommunityData, we can just typecast these snippets to be an array of community snippet. Just make sure you import that from your other file. So this is happy now. And so just a quick fun TypeScript fact, another way you could write an array of a certain type is to write it like this. You could say array and then put that type in there like this. This is the exact same thing. I personally prefer this way. It's totally up to you though. Okay, so now check that out. Now that isJoined variable is detecting that we are indeed in this community because that find function found that snippet of Shaddy's group inside of my snippets. So if I went to a different community page for one that I was not in, this would not happen. And let me see if I can demonstrate that. So I'm going to log out of my shadmerhi account, and I'm going to log in as someone, I think I have an account lol@lol.com that still exists, and I'll sign in. Maybe I made it Shaddy. Yeah, I did. Okay. Okay, so you can see that I logged in as lol@lol.com, and lol@lol.com is not in this community, so isJoined is false. Pretty cool. It's actually working. If I log out of this community and sign back in as shadmerhi@gmail.com, check that out. It detects that I'm in this community automatically. And the reason it was able to do that without me even doing anything is due to this use effect, right? Because we wrote this use effect that is going to trigger every time the user changes. So what happened was I was logged in as lol@lol.com. I then logged out of lol@lol.com, and the user went from the lol, the lol@lol.com object to null. And so then this triggered again, but it did not make it past this because null is a falsy value. Then I logged back in as shadmerhi@gmail.com. Then the user went from null to the shadmerhi user object, which is a truthy value, so it made it past this. It called getMySnippets. It then went and got the snippet docs for shadmerhi's user ID, and that is how that happened. So I think this is pretty cool, and now we're actually able to detect whether or not I'm in this community. And so now all we have to do is just write the logic inside of these two joining and leaving community functions, and we will be able to actually click this button and remove ourselves or add ourselves. Now let's just come down to the bottom of our try catch block in our getMySnippets function and just add setLoading to be false when that fetching is complete. And we actually want to display this loading state inside of this button here in our header. So what we can do is actually add the loading state to the return object of our hook, just like this. And then inside of our header component, we can just grab that value from our hook, and then we can use it down here on our button. I can add is loading state and set it equal to loading from the hook. So you saw that temporarily change there. So direct your eyes to here and watch what happens when I refresh the page. Perfect. So we can see that the loading state is working, and once that my user has been grabbed from the auth service, it then fetches my snippets, and we are in business. And also, one thing you'll notice here is that if I log out, nothing happens, but we should clear that. And this is super easy with Recoil because they have a hook that is called use reset recoil state. And this will basically just clear the atom that we give this hook. In a single line of code, we can do this. So let's go over to our user list component that we haven't been into for 100 years, I think. We are logging out right here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this sign out function. I'm going to copy it, come up here and create another function called logout, which is going to be asynchronous. I'm going to put that sign out function here and await it. And when that successfully completes, we're just going to clear our community state, which makes sense because now that the user has logged out, we don't really want any community data related to this user in our state anymore. So then all we need to do is up here, call that use reset recoil state hook. And the way we call that is we can create a variable. So we can say reset community state. It's going to be equal to use reset recoil state, and then just pass this the community state atom that we are interested in resetting, and then come down here and call that function reset community state. That is it. And then we just have to come down here and change the onClick in this logout button to be our new logout function, just like that. So now when I actually log out, it should clear and we should see this go back to the button that says join. So let's see. Perfect. So let's try that again. So if I log in, shadmerhi@gmail.com. Cool. Log out. Nice. So I'm going to close this file because we are never going to see it again, I don't think. By user menu. Now let's actually write the functions for joining and leaving our community. And I don't know what it is about these functions. I just find them super satisfying to write. They just flow and they're just cool. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird, but let's see if you feel the same way. So inside of our useCommunityData, we did define these functions here. Now this is where we're going to get into batch writes with Firebase. So let's search out Firebase transactions. And if you remember, I was mentioning how batch writes and transactions are very, very similar. And just so we have a bit of a reference, let's open up our create community modal because we actually wrote our transaction here. And let's talk about just the slight difference between these two things. So basically transactions and batch writes represent the same thing in the sense of doing a group of actions with our database, and we only want all of them to succeed or none of them to succeed. So if one of them fails, fail them all. That applies to both transactions and batch writes. In the case of transactions, though, you can do read and write operations, whereas batch writes are only write operations. That is the only difference, very minor. So the only reason we use a transaction in this create community modal was because we were doing a read first. We were just simply reading from the database to see if the community exists. When we're joining or leaving a community, we only need to perform write operations like deleting and updating documents. So we can just use batch writes that only succeed all together. And let's go back to our hook and let's write some batch writes. So inside of both of these functions, there are two database updates that we need to make that we are going to group together into a batch. So the first action inside of our batch is going to be creating a new community snippet for this user, right? If the user is joining this community, we need to take this community and create a snippet and then add it to that user's community snippets. That is the first thing. And the second write operation we want to do in this batch is going to be updating the number of members on this community, right? Because if the user is joining the community, we need to go into that community document and add one to this value number of members. So these two actions are going to represent our batch write. So after this batch write successfully completes and our backend has been updated to reflect this user's joining of the community, we just need to update our client data, which is our recoil state, to actually update our UI and reflect this change to the user. So we can just write update recoil state, which in this case is our community state.mySnippets, right? We're just going to simply add this new snippet to community state.mySnippets. So these are the three things that we have to do in this function. And the leave community function is just going to be the exact opposite of this. So the first thing in the batch write is just going to simply be deleting the community snippet from user. And then we are also going to update the number of members by subtracting 1. Up here, it would have just been 1. And then we will also update our client to remove that community snippet from our recoil state. So now that we've kind of defined what these functions are actually going to be doing, let's actually write this logic out. So let's start with the joining of community. So I'm going to create a try block inside of here. And as usual, I'm going to log an error if it occurs, join community error, and then we can just set error to be error.message. Perfect. And just to make TypeScript happy, let's make this type any. And I think actually down here, we forgot to set error as well in our getCommunitySnippets function. So let's just quickly do that. Set error to be error.message. So now let's work on the ideal case. So here is how we're going to do a batch write in Firestore. So we're going to create a variable called batch, and we're going to use a function from Firestore called writeBatch, and we're going to pass this our Firestore object from client app as usual. And so now on this batch object is where we're actually going to perform these operations. So let's create a new variable called newSnippet. And this is going to be of type community snippet, which I think we're already importing. We're going to give this a community ID of CommunityData.id, and we're going to set the image URL to be the CommunityData.image URL. And if it does not exist, we're just going to make it an empty string. And again, these are not going to exist for now, but we will just add it here because why not? So this represents our new snippet. And so we are not a moderator of this community because we are just joining. So the isModerator key is not going to be added here. So now to actually write this snippet to the database, we can use our batch variable defined on line 68. And we can say batch.set. And this is going to look exactly the same as the setDoc function that we've used before. So we need to pass in a document reference for the document that we actually want to set. So we can say doc, and then we can pass this function our Firestore object from client app. So the path to the collection that we are writing this new document to is going to be users/user.uid/community snippets. So this is the community snippet subcollection that lives on that particular user's document. And then as a third argument to the doc function, we give the ID of this newly created document, which is going to be CommunityData.id. And then the data that we actually want to put inside of this document is going to be that new snippet object, just like this. So the second thing we need to do in our batch is update the number of members on this community document. So because here we are updating an existing document, not creating a new one, we can use batch.update, and this update function is also going to take a document reference. And this particular document lives inside of the collection called communities, and the ID of this document is CommunityData.id. And as a second argument to the update function, we're going to pass in an object that is going to contain the updates that we want to make to this document. And the field that we want to update is number of members. And what we are doing to this field is increasing it by 1. And Firestore has a function called increment, and then we can pass in the value that we want to increment this field by, which in this case is just 1. And that is it for our batch writes. However, just writing these batches out does absolutely nothing. In order to actually make them execute and update our database, we need to call the function batch.commit. And that is actually going to execute these batch writes. And this is an asynchronous function, so we need to put the await keyword in front of it. So do make sure that you have the async keyword on your join community function declaration up here. Okay, so after these batch writes successfully complete without any errors and our database is all nicely updated, we can now update our recoil state on our client to reflect this change. And we're basically just going to add this new snippet up here to the existing mySnippets array. So we can do that by calling setCommunityStateValue, taking the previous value of state, spreading it, and the value we're going to be updating is going to be mySnippets. And what we want to do is, like I said before, append this new snippet to the end of the existing mySnippets array. So we can take the previous value of mySnippets and spread it. So take what's already there and then just add this new one to the end of that array. Perfect. And that is it for this function. All we need to do down here at the end of our catch block is just set loading to be false. Just like that. Awesome. And I'm just going to quickly move this comment down here so that it is alongside what it's actually describing. So now let's work on the leave community function. So let's come down here and create a try catch block just like before. We can log an error, leave community error, error.message, make the type of error any. So in our try block, we can create a batch variable again using that writeBatch function from Firestore. And the first thing we want to do with this batch is delete the snippet off of this user. So we can do that by saying batch.delete. We can pass in the document reference for the document that we actually want to delete. So the path to the collection that this document lives in is going to be the exact same path as up here. So the currently signed in users community snippets subcollection is the collection we are accessing. And as a third argument, the ID of the actual community snippet document is going to be community ID, which we are passing to the function up here. Okay, second batch write we need to do is update our number of members again. And this is going to look pretty much exactly the same as this update here with just a few differences. So I'm just going to copy this one from join community, bring it down here. And the only changes we need to make are the ID of the document that we are updating is going to be community ID. And instead of incrementing this value, we are going to decrement this value by 1 since we are leaving the community. Firestore does not have a decrement function, so we can just make this number negative. So it's going to add -1 to it, and it will work exactly as we desire. So now let's actually execute these batch writes by saying await batch.commit. Okay, so I'm just going to move this update comment down here. And now, once our database has successfully updated without any errors, we now want to update our recoil state. And we can, again, do that with the set community state value function. Take the previous value, spread it. The field we're updating is, again, my snippets. However, this time, we are going to be removing a snippet from the current mySnippets array, not adding it. And we can do that by using the filter function given to us by JavaScript, which is another higher order array function. So we can take the previous value of mySnippets and call the .filter function on it. And this is going to loop through, and it's going to remove items that do not meet a certain condition. And the filter condition that we're going to apply here is we're going to check that the item's community ID does not equal to the community ID that we are removing. Okay, and that is it for this function. We just need to set loading to be false down here. And then also we can set error in the catch block of here to be error.message, just like that. All right, so these functions are done. They look good to me. Let's give them a go. So let's go to my users document, so Shad Merhi, and we can see that I'm currently inside of the community Shaddy's group because I created it. So let's go to our app. So it says, yeah, I am joined into this community. So when I click on this, it should remove me. Okay, so it works on the UI. Let's see if the database updated. Yeah, you can see that that document no longer exists. And this is actually in real time. So if I bring this over here, we can visualize this a bit better. So let me join now. And we can see that in real time that added that document to that subcollection. So leave the community, join the community. Awesome, that is super cool. Let's go to another community that I did not create, new. And let's try joining this one. So join, awesome, it's added in there. Leave, perfect. Now let's check the number of members functionality. So we can see communities, go to new. We can see that there are 2 members in there right now. So if I join this, it updates to 3. If I leave, it decrements to 2. And these are our batch writes in action. So they are clearly working, which is amazing. So let's put this back over here. Okay, so we can now join and leave communities. It updates the number of members, and this is a huge piece of functionality of our app. This is like a critical piece of Reddit, and we have successfully implemented this, and that is super cool. So all we need to do now is just open that auth modal if the user tries to click on this if they are not logged in. So let's log out, and let's come up here and actually implement this. I did have some comments up here. We already have the user from our useAuth state hook. So all we need to do is add a simple check at the top of this on or join leave community function for a valid user. So we can say if there is no user, then let's open the modal. So to open the modal, we can grab our setAuthModalState function from Recoil. So we can say const setAuthModalState, and we can use the useSetRecoilState hook, pass in our authModalState atom, and then come down here and call that function setAuthModalState. And the state we want it to be is open, true, and we can set the view to be the default view of login. And then we can return out of this function because we do not want to proceed with joining or leaving. So now, since I'm not logged in, if I click on this, boom, the modal opens and it's going to ask me to log in. And that is why I love having the auth modal state global in Recoil so that we can protect certain features against unauthenticated users. And that is so cool. So if I did want to join this community, I would have to log in, and then it would allow me to join. So we are done writing all of the functions for joining and leaving communities. And the best part about this hook and these functions is that we can reuse this logic in any component that requires it. In our case, it's going to be top communities, but we could add more components to this app in the future that would need the same functionality, and we could just reuse this hook. And I think that is so cool, really clean architecture, and I'm super excited about it. Okay, so now we're done with the whole joining and leaving a community thing. Let's actually start working on creating posts in the communities, which is probably the most exciting part of this entire project. So on Reddit, how it works is that inside of a community, there's this component here that has an input in it, and then when the user clicks on it, it brings them to the URL r/communityname/submit, where the actual post form is, and then they can create the post from within here. So this thing is basically acting as a link to the submit page. So let's work on that now. And then we can actually get rid of these really ugly borders here and start putting in some nice looking components. All right, so inside of components and inside of our community directory, I'm going to create a new file called CreatePostLink.tsx. And this is what is acting as this input linky type thing here. So inside of here, I'm going to use our snippet. And we are not going to take in any props to this component, so we can get rid of that. And the actual HTML for this component is relatively easy and basic. It's just a flex box with a few icons inside of it, and then some additional styling applied. So now that we actually have a valid left-hand side component defined, let's just go back to our index page for our community quickly and get rid of this dummy left-hand side div and actually use that real component, CreatePostLink. And we can see that show up here in our left-hand side fragment. Okay, so let's come back here, and I'm just going to close my directory so I have some more room. So what I decided to do for this component is to just paste in the code from my existing project. It is a lot of what we have seen already, and I do want to get to the post functionality because it's a lot more exciting. This component is pretty much just acting as a link to the actual creation of post thing. So I figured our time would be better spent doing that, but I will explain the important parts. So I'm just going to paste that in here, and it's only about 70 lines. It's not super long. There's only one important function that we have to go over, and it's a pretty short one. And I will put the link to this component file in the description so you can access it directly. All this thing is just a few icons and an input acting as a link to the submit page. The only function I want to go over is this onClick function here, which is being called when you click on this input. So basically all this function is doing is redirecting the user to the submit page of this community, which lives at this URL r/communityid/submit, which we saw on our demo. The way we are doing that is with the Next.js router, and we can access that router from this hook, useRouter, which is coming from next/router, and the router does have this push method on it where we can just pass in string URLs and we can redirect the user to wherever we would like, and we are just grabbing that community ID from the URL from router.query. So we're just stripping this particular piece of the URL, and just as a reminder, it is called community ID because we gave it that name in this dynamic route down here. And just before this, we are just doing a quick check to see if you are logged in before we redirect you to that page, because we only want authenticated users to go to the submit page. And so if I click on this, we'll notice that the router works. It takes us to the actual submit URL. If you recall, we did define this page a while ago, this submit.tsx file. There is nothing in here. So that is what this error is from. So we're going to just quickly come up with a component here. There's not going to be any props, so we can just get rid of this. And then I'm just going to rename this component to be submit post page, just like that. And I'll just make the text temporarily submit page. And we are going to work on this page next. We are going to be using the router in the future parts of the build, so I wanted to cover how it actually works. So I hope that makes sense. And now we can actually start working on the submit page and build out the form for users to start creating posts. All right, you guys, let's start working on the submit page. This is probably one of the most exciting parts of the entire build because we're going to get into the actual post creation logic. Okay, so let's go to our demo here, and this is what we're going to be creating. So we have a post form, And then we have our about component here, which we're going to create after we get the post functionality working. To handle the overall layout of this page, we can reuse our page content layout component that we created, because we can again see that we have this left-hand side, right-hand side layout here. So let's come to our submit page and let's actually use that page content component. And as you recall, all we need to do here is just give this thing two fragments, one for the left and one for the right, and it will handle all of the layout styling and responsiveness for us. So inside of our left content on this page, this is where we are going to actually have this new post form, right? That's going to be one of the components inside of the left, and then inside of the right here, we're going to have our about component, which we are going to create after. In addition to the new post form, we do have this title up here that says create a post. So let's create that. So in this left fragment, we can move this down, and above here is where we're going to actually create this title. We're going to use a box component as its parent container, and we can import this from Chakra. And we are not using a flex box because we do not need flex styling here, so we're just using an ordinary box. And inside of here, we're going to have the text create a post. And let's come back to our app so we can see what we're doing here. And actually, I'm going to remove these really ugly looking borders because I don't know about you, but I am definitely done looking at those. So we can close this. And now we can see that we have that title there. So let's just apply some simple styles to our box component here. So we're going to give it a padding of 14 pixels on the top and bottom, 0 pixels left and right. Going to give it a border bottom of 1 pixel solid, and the border color is going to just be white. All right, and that is that. We are done with this. Okay, and now we can actually start creating this new post form. So let's go into our components folder, and we're going to create a new folder in here called posts, because we're going to create a series of post-related components. Our first of those components is going to be this new post form, NewPostForm.tsx, and let's use our snippet. So we are going to take in some props here in a bit, but I'm just going to leave this blank for now. Let's come back to our submit file and actually import this and use the real component itself. All right, so we are going to build our form to be nice and modular, clean components so that it's very easy to read and extendable. So we basically just have this stateful navbar here, and then for each nav item, we have an associated component. For example, for post, we have these text inputs. For images and video, we have this uploading component, and we're not going to work on these features here because if I were to build them, this tutorial would be massively long. Plus, these two are a lot more interesting. But feel free to add these to your project. These would be great exercises. After building these other two, you're going to have a really strong understanding of how this form actually works, and it would be a really good exercise to build these on top of it. So let's come back to our app, and let's actually start building out the structure of this component. So the outermost container of our form is going to be a flex box. Let's import this from Chakra. And this is going to have a direction of column. We're going to give it a background of white, a border radius of 4, and a margin top of 2. Now the first component inside of this flex box is going to be another flex box, and this is going to represent our navbar. Now our navbar has 5 items in it. It has post, images, and video, and these other 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a static array outside of our component that is going to be an array of tab items, and each tab item is going to have a piece of text and an icon. And this is kind of the typical way to create multi-tab navigation. So we're going to create this outside of the functional component because it is a static variable. It is not really React related, so we can put it outside. So we can create the array called FormTabs, and this is going to be an array of objects. And each object is going to have a title and an icon. So for example, the first one is going to be post. And for the icons, I'm just going to grab the imports from my project and paste them in here. So make sure you have these imported as well. The icon for post is going to be IO document text. The second nav item is images and video. The icon for this is going to be IO image outline. The third nav item has the text link, and the icon for this is BS link 45 degree. The fourth one is poll, and the icon is BI poll. And the very last one is talk, and this one has BS mic. Perfect. Now down here, we are going to actually map through these tab items, and for each one, we're going to return some sort of HTML. And that HTML is going to be its own component called tab item. And we're going to define the tab item component in another file. For each tab item component, we're going to be passing it a single tab item from our array as a prop. So we're actually going to create a type for our tab items. So we're going to say export type tab item. As we saw, a tab item has a title of type string, and the icon has kind of a weird type. It is type of the Chakra icon dot arguments. If you recall, when we create icons, it has this as prop here, and it accepts a type of icon. And so this is actually what the type of these icons are. Perfect. So let's actually create that component inside of posts. We're going to create tab item.tsx, use our snippet, and this is going to accept a prop, and that prop is going to be of type tab item. And why doesn't that want to import? Tab item. There we go. And we can grab that from our props here. All right, so now if I take that item and I just return the title, let's come back over here, and rather than just returning this fragment, let's return our newly created tab item, and this thing is expecting a prop of type tab item, so we can pass in the item. Let's come back to our app over here, and we can see that we are getting the titles of those tab items, but they look terrible, so we have some work to do on the CSS, but at least we are getting some data in there. Now, something else you'll notice about this nav bar that is really important is that we need to know which one we are currently clicked on, because the styles change, and that also changes which component we're actually seeing in the form. So we're going to need some form of state to actually track which tab item is currently selected. So I'm going to create a state variable called selectedTab, and the setter function is going to be setSelectedTab, and this is just going to be local state, so we can just use the useState hook. And the default one, we just want to be this post one here, which is going to be form item tabs at index 0. That is the initial value of state. So we can say form tabs at index 0, and we're actually just going to use the text for our selected state. And I'm just going to close our nav on the side so we have more room. So now we actually have a way of detecting which one is selected. Because when we iterate through them, we can pass in a prop called selected, which is going to be a Boolean, which represents if this particular tab item is the currently selected one. That Boolean is going to be the result of the statement that this particular item's title is equal to the currently selected tab state. So if the current one we're iterating through is the one that's selected, then this is going to be true. So only one of these is going to have selected being true at a single time, because we can only have one selected tab item. So inside of tab item, we now need to accept that as a prop. So we can say selected Boolean. Let's grab that from here. And we're going to use that to apply that conditional styling. Cool. Let's come back to our app here, and let's start working on the structure of our nav items. So basically each nav item is going to be represented by a flexbox, and inside of this flexbox we're going to have another flexbox, which is going to be the parent container of the icon, and each tab item is going to have the icon of the item it's being passed, .icon, and underneath this we're just going to have some text, and that text is just going to be item.title. Perfect, so now we're actually seeing those icons show up there. Okay, and this icon container, we're going to give it an align items of center, and a height of 20 pixels, and a margin right of 2. And this text here, we're going to give a font size of 10 points, so it's going to be a little bit smaller there. Let's actually work on this parent container now, which is where all of this conditional styling is going to go using the selected state. All right, so on this outermost container, we're going to say justify, center, and align center, so that we're centering everything inside of the nav item. We're going to give it a flex grow of 1 so that they all take up an even amount of space. We're going to apply a padding of 14 pixels top and bottom, 0 pixels left and right. And we want to make the cursor pointer because this thing is clickable. Okay, and our hover styling is going to just have a background of gray 50. So you can see now when I hover over these things, we're starting to get some dynamic stuff going on here. Let's actually use this selected state to apply this conditional styling. So the color of the text is going to change depending on if we're selected or not. If we are selected, the color is going to be blue 500, and if we are not, it's going to be gray 500. The border width is also going to change. If we are selected, And we're going to give 4 parameters to the border widths here. One for the top, right, bottom, and left. So it's going to be 0 pixels, 1 pixel, 2 pixel, 0 pixels if we are selected. And if we are not selected, we're going to have 0 pixels, 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 0 pixel. The next style is going to be border bottom color. And our border bottom color is going to change depending on if we are selected. If we are selected, we are going to have a border bottom of blue 500. If we are not, it's going to be gray 200. Okay, we're starting to see some stuff appear on the UI there. The border right color is going to be gray 200. Okay, and that is all of the CSS we're going to add here. The very last thing we need to add to this flexbox is just an onClick function, and that onClick function needs to toggle the selected state so that we're actually selecting the one that we click on. In order to do that, we need access to the setSelected function defined up here, so we're going to pass that as a prop as well. So as a third prop to each tab item, we're going to pass the function setSelectedTab, and it's going to be equal to setSelectedTab. And then inside of tab item, we just have to add that to our tab item props. So we can say setSelectedTab. So this function is going to take in an argument of type string because we are sending it the title of the particular tab item that we clicked on, and it's going to return void. So now we just need to accept this as a prop here. And then down here, add that as an onClick function. So we can say setSelectedTab and pass in our item.title. Okay, so now if I click on these things, you can see that we're actually toggling the state and the conditional stylings are being applied. And actually one thing I did miss in these styles here is just the font weight, and we're going to make this 700 so that makes it look nice and bold. Okay, so we are completely done with this tab item component. We are going to close this and come back into our new post form. All right, guys, let's continue on with our post form. I'm just going to collapse these form tabs so they are not in our way. And actually, we can make the type of this, I don't know why I didn't do this before. Let's make the type of that an array of tab items. All right, so inside of our component here, I'm going to define the 3 sort of core functions that are going to be used and that really make up our post form. So the first one is going to be the one actually responsible for creating a post. So I'm going to call it handleCreatePost, and it's going to be asynchronous. The second one is going to be onSelectImage, and this is going to be the function that actually handles what happens when a user selects a particular image from their operating system and puts it into our post form. And then the third one is going to be onTextChange, which is going to be pretty much the exact same as those onChange functions that we created in our login form and signup form that just handle what happens when a user types into a text field. Okay, so these are the 3 functions that are going to govern this entire component. And this is the one that actually is going to create the post and send it to Firebase. But in order to send a post to our database, we're going to need some content in that post, which is where these 2 functions come into play. All right, at the very top here, I'm also going to create some state for our text input. And the 2 inputs that a post contains is a title and a body. All right, so I'm going to call this text inputs and set text inputs. And then we're going to set this equal to useState. And inside of here, like I just said, we're going to have a title. We're going to initialize as an empty string and a post body, which is also going to be empty. And then under here, I'm going to define the state that is going to represent the actual selected file for the image that the user selected. So we can create a state variable called selected file and then set selected file. And this is going to be useState. And the type of this selected file is going to be of type string. It's going to represent the actual name of the file or the thing that we would use as the source of the image. And we're going to define some more state variables in a bit, but these are the core ones required for creating a post, and these are the functions that we're going to use. So the next component that we're going to create is going to be our text inputs, like these inputs over here. So let's come back to our app and start building this. All right, so underneath our navbar flex container, we're going to create another flex container, which is going to represent the container of all of the other components displayed in the form. So our first component inside of here is going to be those text inputs. So I'm going to call this text inputs, and I'll comment that out. Okay, and let's go create this text inputs component. So inside of our posts folder here, I'm going to create another folder called PostForm, and inside of that folder, I'm going to create text inputs.tsx and use our snippet. And this is going to take in some props, but we will define that after we have built out the HTML for it. So the Text inputs are going to be a stack component from Chakra. And just as a reminder, a stack is just a flexbox with the direction of column, and it handles the spacing for us. And we're going to space out our inputs with a value of 3, and we're going to make the width of this 100% so that it takes up the entire container. And essentially all that's going to be in here are going to be 2 text inputs and then the button to actually create the post. So one of those inputs is going to be an actual input from Chakra, and the second input for the text body is going to be a text area component from Chakra. So it's a little bit larger than just a regular input. And then underneath that, we're going to have a container for our button. So we can just put that in here for now, just like this. And this button is going to say post. That's the button they're actually going to click on to create a post. And we just need to import flex from Chakra here. Now that we have something defined, let's come back to our NewPostForm and bring this thing in. Import from text inputs, and we have the new form displayed there. Doesn't look very good, but we will make that a lot better right now. And we're going to give this flex container here a padding of 4 just to make it look nice and clean there. Now let's go in here and work on the styling of these inputs, and they pretty much have the exact same styling. We just need to write out the styles once, and then we can just paste them for the other one. All right, so the name of this input is going to be title because it's the title of our post. The value is going to be coming from our props from that text input state that I created, but we'll come back to that. Our onChange is also going to be coming from our props, so I will also come back to that. Our font size is going to be 10 point. Our border radius is going to be what we always use, 4, and then our placeholder for this is going to be the text title. All right, and I'm just going to comment these out for now because it was complaining there. Okay, and let's apply our pseudo class styling. So our placeholder, we're going to give a color of gray 500. We're going to apply focus styling. So when the user actually clicks on this thing, what does it look like? We're going to give it an outline of none, a background of white, a border of 1 pixel solid, and a border color of black. Nice. So if I click on that, we can see that that is what it looks like. That looks super clean. Nice. And that is it for our styling. So I'm just going to copy these and paste them down in our text area because we're doing the exact same styling down here. Let's just change the placeholder of this to be, I forget what the placeholder is actually. What is it? Text, optional. And that is indeed what it does say on Reddit, because I think you only need a title, which is kind of weird in my opinion. And the last thing is that we just need a name here, and that is going to be body. And just as a reminder, these names are required because we need them inside of our onChange function in order for that function to know which part of the state to update. Okay, and actually one last thing I forgot to this text area is just a simple height of 100 pixels. Just make it a little taller than it is by default. All right, now let's come down to our button. And on Reddit, the button is sort of over here. So we can do that with our flex container, and we can just give it a property of justify, and we can say flex end. That'll move it over there. And on our button, we're going to give this a height of 34 pixels, padding of 0 pixels, 30 pixels. We're going to add some disabled state here because we're going to disable the button if the user has not put a post title. And then on click, when the user actually wants to post this post, what is going to happen? This is what's going to call our CreatePost function. Okay, and I guess it will not allow us to just have this empty, so I'll just say disabled false for now. Perfect, and that is it for the layout of this form. So all we need to do now is just add the onChange function to these 2 inputs so that we actually have some text being put into our new post. So let's come up here and let's define the props that we're actually going to take in to this component. So the first prop is actually going to be our text input state, and this is going to be an object with 2 parameters, and the first one is going to be the title, type string, body is also going to be string. So this is how we can define types for objects in a TypeScript. I don't think we've seen this before. So our onChange function for our inputs is going to take in an event, and the event is going to be of type React.ChangeEvent, and the element producing this change event is going to be an HTML input element or an HTML text area element, and this function is just going to return absolutely nothing, so we can just say that it returns void. It's also going to take in the very critical function handleCreatePost because that's what our button is going to actually call, and we're going to declare this as a callback function that returns nothing, and then we are going to also take in a boolean for our loading state. Okay, let's come down here and actually destructure those props. So we can say text inputs, onChange, handleCreatePost and loading. Just like that. All right, then on our inputs here, we can use the onChange. So onChange is equal to onChange. Same thing down here for our text area. The value of this title is going to be TextInputs.title, and the value of our text area is going to be TextInputs.body. Perfect, and this is not happy. I think because we are not passing in any props from our parent yet, that is why this is complaining. Okay, so let's actually pass those in. All right, so our text input prop is going to be equal to the text input state variable. handleCreatePost is going to be equal to handleCreatePost. onChange is going to be equal to our onTextChange function. Save that so it formats. And the last thing we're going to take in is our loading state, which we have not defined yet, so I'm just going to say false. We will define this when we actually build out this handleCreatePost function. Okay, so we actually have our form being displayed now. And now let's toggle the visibility of this component using our selected tab state. Okay, so we only want to show this component if our selected tab state is equal to post. So only show this if we are currently on the post tab. So if I come here, we're not going to show it. We're going to show the ImageUpload component. And this is really cool. This is how you can create sort of multi-tab components using state. So let's work on this on TextChange function because it is something we have seen before. I'm just going to copy the input type from our text inputs file, paste it in here. Okay, save that so it formats. In this function, I'm going to destructure all of the values that we need off of our event. So the way we can do that is we can strip the target off of it. And then inside of the target, we can destructure the name and the value. Perfect. So now we have the name of the input that produced this event, and we actually have the value that the user has created by typing into the input. Now we just need to update our state by saying set text inputs, take the previous value of state, spread it, and then only update the field that produced this event. And that is going to be at field name, and we want to set it to value. All right, so now if I come to my React extension here, and I inspect this form, let's open this up a bit. So text inputs, we can see that we have this form state here, body title, they are empty. If I start typing in here, that is changing. So down here, hey, this is a nice post. Perfect. So our state is working for our text inputs. And we might as well define that loading state that we are going to need in just a little bit. So we'll say set loading is equal to useState. We will initialize it as false. Come down here, pass that to our text inputs component, and then we will come into here and use that properly for our button. Our button is going to have loading state that is going to be equal to that loading prop. And then now that we have our text inputs, we could say disable this button if there is no title inside of our text inputs. And then our onClick is going to be handleCreatePost. Okay, so we are completely done with this component, so we can close this. And now we can start working on the image uploading component, which I think is really exciting. I love working on image functionality. So if we come over to our demo here and we come over to that tab, we can see that it's a relatively simple component. We just have a box and this button on the inside that says upload. And if I click on this, it just opens up our file system and I can select an image and it will display a preview of the image. And then we can either just go back to the post for the text inputs, or we can just remove this image to select a new one. Same exact flow as Reddit. All right, so let's start building this out. Let's come back to our app here. This component is going to be a sibling of our text inputs component here. So let's come into our directory and create inside of PostForm a new component called ImageUpload.tsx. Famous old snippet. So we are going to take in some props. I will leave it blank for now though. Let's get the actual structure of this component built out and then we can worry about the props. So I'm going to close my directory. So as usual, we're going to use a flexbox for our outermost container here, and we want to center everything inside of this container. So we're going to give it a justify equal to center and a line equal to center as well. And we're going to make the width 100% so that it takes up the entire width. And I'm just going to put the text image upload in here. And then let's go back to our new post form. And I think I'm getting a React key error here. Yeah, React key. And the reason that is because I am forgetting to pass a unique key to our tab item components here. This is just a requirement of React when you do map through an array and return a component. We do need to pass each component a unique key, and that should make that error go away in the future. All right, so let's come down here beneath our text inputs, and we can use our selected tab state again, except this time we want to check if the selected tab is equal to images and video. And if it is, we want to show our new ImageUpload component. Just like that. So now if we come over here, we should see that there. Let's come back into here and build the rest of this out. All right, so let's handle the case where there is no image selected yet. We are going to bring in an image as a prop, and we will do some conditional rendering to display that image if it exists. But let's get that upload button working. Okay, so inside of this flexbox, we're going to have another flexbox, and this is actually where our button is going to go. So let's import a button from Chakra, and this is going to say upload. And on this button container flexbox, we're also going to make the justify equal to center and align center as well. We're going to give this a padding of 20 so that it gives it a nice height of the container there. And we're going to give this a border of 1 pixel dashed. It's a dashed border. And the border color is going to be gray 200. And then let's make the width of this container equal to 100% so that it spans the entire thing. And then we can just add a border radius of 4. So it's nice and rounded there. Awesome, that looks super clean. Our button is going to be the outline variant. Variant is equal to outline. And we're going to give it a height of 28 pixels. And we will have an onClick on this thing in just a second as well. So let's create that here as just an empty function. So what needs to happen when the user actually clicks on this button is it does need to open up the file system like I was showing before, and it needs to prompt the user to actually select a file. So in order to do that, we cannot just use a regular button. We need to also use an input element and make the type of that input element file. And that way, it is automatically going to know to open up the file system for the user to select the file. So that's going to look like this. We're going to have an input, and that input is going to be of type file. So if I save this, we automatically get this button that says choose file and no file chosen. So you can see that if I choose a file here and I select this image, you can see that it displays the file name here. But we don't want to show this input. It's kind of ugly, and we already have a button that we want to actually do that same functionality. And so what we can do is actually hide this input and then have this button click on this input sort of behind the scenes. It's kind of cool. And the way we can do that is by using the useRefHook from React. Okay, so let's come to the top of our component and let's create a new variable called selectedFileRef. And this is where we're actually going to bring in the useRefHook from React. So you can store any value inside of the selected file ref. However, it is typically used to store HTML elements in it so that we can manipulate and interact with these HTML elements in certain use cases. It's a kind of lesser used hook. I don't use it super often, but it does come in handy for situations like this. So what we can do is we can come down to our input here and we can make the value of this input ref to be that selected file ref. And this is going to complain, and it's going to say that the types do not match up. So we can come up here and we can fix that. We can make the type of this ref HTML input element because that is the value we're storing in this ref, and then we can initialize it as null. And that should make this happy. And very conveniently, the input element has a property called hidden. We can just pass that as a prop and it'll just make it disappear, but it's still there. It's just not being displayed. So the reason that this is going to be helpful in our case is that because we are storing this input inside of a file ref here, we can interact with this input using this ref variable. And this will make more sense as I actually write out this function here. So in this onClick, what we want to do is implicitly click on that input, which will actually open up the file system. So the way we can do that is we can pass in this callback here, and this callback is going to interact with that selected file ref .current, and .current is just the current value of this ref. Then we want to actually click on that HTML element here. And just to rewind a second there, we can see all of the available methods on an HTML element, and we can interact with it without actually kind of interacting with it. So it's pretty cool, and they do come in handy sometimes. So here we want to use click. Okay, so now when I click on this button, the button is going to go click, I'm using quotations with my hands right now, on this input element, which is kind of cool. So check this out. So if I click on this, that opens up the file system. And that is super cool. We are implicitly clicking on this input. So now that we actually have an input to accept a file from the user, what do we actually do with that file when it has been selected? And how do we do something useful with it? Which in our case is storing it in state and then displaying a preview of that image on the screen for the user. So in the same way that text inputs have an onChange function that triggers every single time the user actually types a key, file inputs also have an onChange function, but this one triggers once a file has been selected. And also, with text inputs, we grab the value that the user has typed using the event that the input generates. And in this case, it's the exact same thing. We can grab the file that the user selects from the event that triggers from the file input. And this is where that onSelectImage function is going to come into play. This is the function that we're going to pass to this input's onChange function. So we're going to say onChange is equal to our onSelectImage. We haven't passed this as a prop yet, but this is the idea. So when the user selects a file, that onSelectImage function is going to be triggered, and we're going to take that file from the change event and do some processing with it and store it in state. So that is the idea. So let's just leave this blank for now. I'm just going to leave this as an empty function in here for now. And let's go back to our NewPostForm. So inside of this function, we're still going to take in an event, and this event is still going to have the same type as the text input change event. And we're going to say that the thing that generates this event is of type HTML input element. Same exact thing as the text change. All right, and let's just take a closer look at this event for a second here. So typically, what we're used to is grabbing the value off of this event from text inputs, but the target, as we can see, also has a property called files. So this is how we're actually going to access the file that the user has selected. So I'm just going to remove this for a sec. So what we need to do is actually read the data from this file and kind of process it and convert it to a form that is going to be useful to us. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a variable called reader. And this reader is going to be a new file reader. And this is a class provided by JavaScript, and it is used in cases like this for file uploading and to actually read the data from files. So the first thing we're going to do is check that there is an actual valid file that we can read data from. And the way we're going to do that is by, again, accessing the event.target.files. But the value of this is actually going to be an array because the input is actually built to accept multiple files. In our case, we're only uploading one, so this is only going to be an array of one element, but you could upload many if you would like. So what we want to do is grab the value at the first index of this array. And we're just going to do some optional chaining here to avoid accessing an undefined array. And inside of this if statement is where we're actually going to read the data from that file using our reader. So what we're going to do is we're going to say reader.readAsData URL, and we're going to pass this function the actual file that the user uploaded, just like this. And we do not need optional chaining here because this if statement already checks that this is a valid value. So TypeScript knows that if we make it inside of this if statement, this is a valid value. So once the reader has finished processing this file and this method completes, we want to take that result and actually store it in state, because that is going to be the actual image that we can display on the screen and that we're going to store in our database on our post. So the reader has an event listener called onLoad, and this is going to trigger once this readAsData method completes, and we can create a callback function that is going to be executed when this event happens. So this onLoad event is going to emit what is called a reader event, and we can take that reader event and actually extract the result of the loaded file and store it in state. So inside of this function, we're going to say if reader event.target.result. So we're saying, is there a valid result? If there is, let's set our selected file to be that selected result, event.target.result. And as we can see, TypeScript is not happy here, and it is saying that type string or array buffer is not assignable to type string or undefined. And the reason this is happening is, like I was saying before, how the input is built to accept multiple inputs, so the result could technically be a single file or an array of files. And in our case, we are just going to only ever have one. So I'm just going to typecast this to a string, and that should satisfy TypeScript. And that is it for this function here. So what we can do now is pass this function as a prop to our ImageUpload component. But first, let's go into our ImageUpload component and just kind of define all of the props that we're going to accept in here. So the first prop that we're going to select is going to be the actual selected file, and this is going to be of type string, as we just saw. And we're going to make this optional because the user may or may not select a file, so it's not always going to be defined. So the second prop is going to be that onSelectImage function, and we saw that it took in an event of type react.changeEvent, change event, and this takes in an argument of type HTML input element, and it does not return anything, so void. The third prop is going to be our setSelectedTab function, and that is because after a user uploads an image, we show them that back to post button that returns them to the post tab, so we need to be able to toggle the tab state in here as well. So this takes in a value of type string and does not return anything. And as a last prop, we are going to accept setSelectedFile, and that is so that the user can clear selected file state and select a new one if they choose. And this is going to accept a value of type string, and we do not return anything, so void. So that's it for our props. So let's actually come down here in the component and destructure those. So selected file, on select image, setSelectedTab, and setSelectedFile. Perfect. Now we actually need to pass these props into our component. So let's come over here. So our first one is going to be the selected file. This is going to be selected file. We're going to do on select image. It's going to be equal to on select image. Third one is going to be setSelectedTab. This is equal to setSelectedTab. Last one, setSelectedFile. Perfect, just like that. And look at how clean this component is. It just is satisfying to look at. It's so modular. Okay, let's go into our ImageUpload component here. And for our onChange on that file input, let's actually pass it that onSelectImage function. Let's see what happens to our state here when we actually select a file. So NewPostForm. So this is our state here. We can see that for the file state, there is nothing there. It is undefined. So what happens when I actually select a file? Okay, so there was a little bit of delay there as it was loading the data. We can see that it's storing this ginormous piece of data in our file state. And so this is what we can actually pass to an HTML image to render that image on the screen. So just to show you that very quickly, if I create an image component here and I pass in the source, and the source is going to be selected file, let's see what happens. We can actually see that the image is being displayed there. So it is actually taking this ginormous thing and is able to interpret it as that image. And now all we have to do is just make some styling improvements to this component, and then we will be able to work on that handleCreatePost function. So inside of our ImageUpload component, we basically just want to check for the existence of the selected file, meaning that the user has indeed selected a file, and if it exists, let's just display that image, and if it does not, we will want to display this upload button here. So it's going to be quite simple. All we need to do is just add a ternary operator inside of here, and we're going to say if there is a valid selected file, we're going to show the image, which is going to be in this fragment here. Otherwise, let's just show this thing that we have already created, which is going to be this flexbox here. Just have to adjust this a little bit, just like that. So now, inside of this fragment, we're actually going to put that image in here, and those buttons that allow the user to clear the image state and then go back to the post tab. The first component is going to be an image from Chakra, and the source of that image is going to be the selected file itself, just like that. And I'm going to upload an image here so that we can actually see what we're doing. Perfect. So we have the image selected there, and on this image we're going to set a max width of 400 pixels and a max height of also 400 pixels, because we don't want the image to be too large if the user uploads a super big one. And underneath this image here, we're going to add a stack component from Chakra, and this is where those two buttons are going to go. So we're going to make the direction of this row, because stack is by default column direction, and the default spacing for a stack is 2, which is going to work here, so we don't really need to modify the spacing. And our stack is just going to have 2 buttons inside of it, so just like this. And our first button is going to say back to post, and the second button is going to say remove, as in remove that image from state so that they can select a new one. All right, so let's style these buttons. So the height of this first button is going to be 28 pixels. And on click, we want to call that setSelectedTab function that we passed in as a prop. And we want to pass this the post title so that it actually takes us back to the post tab. So if I click on this now, it will take us back here. Perfect. And let's just make sure that we have a direction of column on this outermost flex container. There we go. And on our stack here, we're going to add some margin top, and this is going to be 4, so that it kind of adds some space between the image and the buttons. The second button is going to be our outline variant, also going to have a height of 28 pixels, and then on click for this one, all we need to do is empty out that selected file state. So we can say set selected, I don't know why I'm not getting autocomplete, set selected file to be an empty string, just like that. Okay, awesome, this looks great. So now if I click remove, the file is removed from state and the user can select a different one. And then once they select an image and they like it, they can go back to the post. And this back to post button is kind of unnecessary because they can just, technically go back to here. But just for improved user experience, I think that's why Reddit put it here to make it more intuitive. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to go back to the post because that is actually where I can post this post. Awesome. So we are completely done with this image uploading component. We can close it and start to work on the actual logic for creating this post and sending it to the database, because we can take in text inputs, we can take in an image. We are ready to actually store these things in the database. All right, you guys, let's start writing out this handleCreatePost function. So let's talk about the series of steps that is going to happen inside of this function. So the first thing that is going to happen is that we're going to construct our new post object. And we're going to make this of type post. And we have not created this type yet, but we will do that in just a few minutes. The second thing that we're going to do is actually store the post in our database, in our posts collection. The third thing that we're going to do is check and see if the user has decided to include an image with their post, which will mean that there will be a truthy value for this selected file. And so what we'll do if they have selected a file is actually take this image and go and store it in our Firebase Storage, which is actually separate from our database. Storage and database are two separate things. And if you recall from our client app file, we did define this storage instance here, but we have not yet used it. So this is going to be the first look at that. We're going to actually see how to store media content. Okay, so if there is a file, we will go and store in storage. And this is going to be done using some Firebase functions, and one of those functions is going to be this getDownloadURL function. So this function is actually going to conveniently return a URL to that image, and that is the thing that we want to store on our post document in our database. And you might be wondering, well, didn't we already store the post in the database? Why did we do this image uploading after creating the post if we need this image URL on our post? And that is a very good question. The reason is that we want to ensure that a post has successfully been created and stored in our database before actually uploading that associated image into our storage. Because if we did it in the reverse order and we uploaded the image first, there is a chance that there could be some sort of error in actually creating the post itself. And if that does happen, we just now have this kind of random image in our storage with no post that it belongs to. So this is why we kind of create the post first. Once it has been successfully created, then update it with this image URL. So the third step then would be to update the post doc by adding the image URL. And the very, very last thing that we're going to do is just simply redirect the user back to the community page. And back on the community page, there is going to be a component called posts, which we are going to create very shortly. And that component is going to be responsible for actually going to the database, getting all of the posts in the current community, and then actually storing them in state and then actually rendering them. And so that is how we're going to see our newly created post. Let's tackle step 1 of this function, and that is actually creating our new post object that we're going to store in our database. And as I mentioned in this comment, this is going to be of type post. But we do not have that yet, so we do need to define it. And while we are doing that, we are also going to create our post atom for our recoil state because we are going to need it across multiple pages. So let's go into our atoms folder, and inside of here, I'm going to create a new file called postatom.ts. So let's go ahead and import atom from recoil. And here we're going to define our type for our post. And what I'm going to do is actually open up our demo here so that we can actually see all of the data that is displayed on the post, and that is going to help us create the type for this post. Okay, so the most important thing is it's going to have an ID of type string. It is going to also have a community ID so that we know what community it belongs to, also type string. We're going to store the creator ID, so the user who actually created this post, and we are also going to store the creator's display name. It's going to have a title of type string. It's going to have a body of type string. lots of strings. And we're also going to store the number of comments that this post has, because we can see that down here. We are displaying that data here, so we do need to include it on our post, and that is going to be a number. We are going to store the vote status, so the number of upvotes or downvotes this thing has, and that is going to be a number. It is going to have a optional image URL because they are not mandatory for creating posts. And lastly, we're going to add the created at timestamp, and this is going to be of type timestamp from Firebase, so make sure that imports up top there. Okay, and actually one last thing I forgot up here is the community image URL. And this is going to be optional as well because we have not yet built this in. And we're including this because you can see on each post that we do have that little image for the community that that post is a part of. So that should be it for our post type. Now let's create a TypeScript interface to actually model what our actual post state is going to look like. So the first parameter in here is going to be selected post. And this is going to be used when we actually do single page view of posts. So when a user clicks on a post, it is going to store that post in selected post. The second parameter is going to be all of the posts that are part of a community. So when we go to a community page, we are going to store all of those posts in this state here. And it's also going to store the posts that appear on our home page. We're going to come back here and add a parameter called post votes, and we're going to add this in when we build in the voting functionality. And as usual, we need our default state value. So I'm going to call this default post state, and this is going to be of type post state. And we're going to initialize selected post to be null, and posts are going to be an empty array. And now all we have to do is create the actual post state recoil atom. So post state is equal to atom. Inside of here, we're going to give this a key of post state, and our default value is going to be default post state. And then we can pass in the type of the state by passing that in here. So this atom is of type post state. Okay, perfect. This is all we need for now. We're going to come back in a bit and add this voting functionality, but for now we have everything that we need. So now we can actually import this type from that file if it's going to pick it up. There we go. Since our posts are going to contain actual user data, we do need access to the currently logged in user. So what I'm going to do is actually come back to our submit page and grab the user in here and pass it as a prop to our new post form. And the reason I'm doing it up here is because we're going to use it in here for some other reasons as well. So we're going to say const user is equal to useAuthState, pass it our auth object, and then in our new post form, we are going to pass that as a prop. User is equal to user. Awesome. Then inside of new post form, we can declare that prop up here. So we can say user, and this is going to be of type user from Firebase auth. And if you remember, we also need to include the type of null because it is initialized as null as well as undefined. So we can make this optional, and this should satisfy TypeScript over here. And we also saw that our post needs the community ID that it is being created in. So we're going to need to grab that somehow as well. And we're going to get that from the router using the useRouter hook like we saw already. So let's come up to the top here and grab the router. So const router is equal to useRouter from NextRouter. And now inside of our handleCreatePost function, we can destructure the router.query object and grab that community ID from it. And let's just accept our user as a prop here. And now we actually have all of the data necessary to actually create a valid post and tie it to all of the proper entities like the user and the community. All right, let's actually populate this new post object now. So we're going to store our community ID in there that we just grabbed off the router. Our creator ID is going to be our user.uid. Our creator display name is going to be the same thing we did in our drop-down menu over here when we did that splitting of the email to kind of grab this display name type thing. So that's going to be user.email.split. We want to split at the @ sign in the email and then grab the first index of that split array. The TypeScript compiler is not happy here, and this is basically having to do with the way we declared our user type up here. So I'm just going to change the type of this a bit to make our lives a bit easier with TypeScript. So what I'm going to do is always declare this user as type user, and we're going to be able to safely do this because we're going to come back to our submit file and wrap this in a condition and not even show this component until there is a truthy valid user from this hook. So that is how we're actually safely able to pass this user as a valid user. We are still getting some here though, so we can remove this optional chaining. And then since we do know that there is going to be a valid user because we are not even showing this component unless there is, I'm just going to add the bang operator here. And this bang operator in TypeScript is our way of telling the TypeScript compiler that we know for sure that this is going to be a valid value, so it is safe to proceed. And then this error up here has to do with the router being a string or an array of strings or undefined. But since in our case we are only going to have a single non-array string and we are going to assume it is not undefined, I'm going to change the value of this and just typecast the community ID from the router to be of type string to satisfy the TypeScript compiler. This is actually better. I prefer to have this always as a user and then just kind of protect against even showing that component without even having a valid user. So I think that's just a bit more safe. Sorry, that was a bit of a TypeScript tangent that we had to go on there, but it was a good lesson. Now, the next part of our post is going to be our title, and this is going to be from TextInputs.title. Our body is going to be TextInputs.body, and we can initialize the number of comments to be 0, because all new posts have 0 comments, and the vote status is also going to be 0. All we're missing is our created@at timestamp, and to do that, we can call that server timestamp function from Firestore. And this is basically complaining because the server timestamp function is only available on the actual Firestore servers. We don't really have access to it on the client, so that is why TypeScript is kind of freaking out here. And we could technically create our own custom type to match what is created on the Firestore server and put all these fields on it. But we can also just, as a simpler solution, just typecast this to a timestamp from Firestore. So do make sure that imports up top here. All right, let's actually move to step 2 of this function, which is going to be actually storing this in our database. And this is where we're actually going to start writing some asynchronous code. So I'm going to create a try catch block to help us with our error handling. So if an error occurs, we were going to log handle create post error, log the error, and then make this of type any. And actually, I just want to see the message of this error. Okay, so inside of our try block, we're going to create the reference to our newly created post document. So it's going to be called post.docRef, and this is going to be the result of our add_doc function from Firestore, and we need to tell it what collection we want to write our new document to. So we can pass in the collection function. This is going to take in our Firestore object from our client app file, and the name of the collection that we want to write to is posts. Now, as a second argument, we can just pass in the data that we want to write into this document, which is going to be new post. Okay, now let's get into this image processing stuff. So let's bring this up here. So we have some good comments. So let's check if there is a selected file. So we can say if there is a selected file, we want to create an image ref, which is going to be a reference to the image in our Firebase storage. So we can use this function called ref from Firebase. And this is the function that's actually going to connect to our storage instance. So we can pass it our storage from client app. And the path at which we want to store this image is going to be post/post.docref.id. And this is actually how we're tying this image to this specific post. We're actually putting the ID into the storage path and then /image. So we're saying kind of this post's image. But this is just a reference. We actually need to upload this image. And the way we're going to do that is by using the upload string function from Firebase Storage. We're going to pass it our image ref, and we're going to pass it the actual thing we are uploading, which is our selected file. And so we're uploading our selected file inside of our image ref. And as a third argument, we need to pass the format of this file, and our reader returned a formatting type of data URL because we said read as data URL. So that is what the format is for that. And then once that is finished uploading, we need to actually get that download URL, which is going to be the actual URL that we can use to view this image, which is kind of what I was referring to up here. So let's move these comments down. So check for a selected file, store in storage, and then we want to get the download URL and then update our post. So we can create a new variable called download URL, and this is going to call that function getDownloadURL, which is from Firebase Storage. And the thing we want to get the download URL for is our image ref. Now that we actually have a valid image URL, let's update our post document. So we can say await update doc, pass in the document ref that we want to update, and the update that we want to make is to the field image URL, and that value is going to be download URL. Awesome. Now let's just add our loading state up here. So set loading true. And then at the bottom of the try catch, we can set loading to be false. And now what we need to do is just redirect the user back to where they came from, which is the community homepage. So we can call this function router.back. And that handles that for us. I'm just going to comment this out for now though, so we can actually kind of analyze the post creation a bit more while staying on this page. All right, I think we are done writing out this function. Let's actually give it a spin and see if we can create a post and store this image in our storage. All right, before we do that, we do need to go into our Firestore project here in our console and go into storage and just change the permissions a bit, because if you go into the rules, by default, the storage is completely locked. It's saying allowed read write if false, and false is always false, so it is never going to allow you to do this. So I'm just going to change this to true, which is going to allow us to always do it in all circumstances, which is fine for development. We are going to come back and write some rules in a little bit. So let's go see if we can actually upload this thing. So we should see a new folder in here, and we also should see a new collection here called posts. So let's come to our form. Let's create first post. Here is the first post. Bunch of exclamation points, and let's upload an image as well. And this image is going to be our classic demo image. And then back to the post, and let's give it a go. Oh, what's it doing? What's it doing? Okay, so it was loading for a while, and we did not see an error here. So let's go see what happens. So, okay, our database, let's refresh this. We can see that, yes, there is a post collection. Very nice. New post document in here, awesome. And look at this, the image URL is probably the most exciting thing of all this. But yeah, all that data was stored in there. So this image URL is actually the thing we can literally type into our browser and in a new tab, and like it will take us to this image. That is so cool. And that is how we're actually going to display our images on our posts in our communities. Very cool. And we can go see the actual image inside of our storage here. If you come to storage, we can see that there has been a new folder created called posts, because that is what we gave as our first path segment here. Inside a post, we are going to see a folder for that specific post, and then we have stored a file called image in here. And if we click on this, we can see that it gives us a little preview, and very nice. This is so cool. This makes posts so much more exciting because images are just fun and they make it look really cool. And just for good measure, let's try creating a post without an image. So we would redirect after a successful post. So we would be already back on the community page by now. So the post form would be clear, but since we kind of commented out the router here, we just have to kind of manually clear the form. I'm just going to create a new title called second post, and here is the second post. And we do not have an image, so let's give this a go. Much faster this time because there's no image uploading. Come to our Firestore Database, posts. You can see that there has been another post created, but this time there is no image URL, which is good, so it can handle both cases, just like Reddit. Awesome, so now we can actually create posts, which is another ginormous piece of functionality solved, and now all we have to do is go back to the community page, call the database, get those posts, and then actually view them on the screen in the feed. Okay guys, one last thing I actually do want to add here as well is just a quick error component, and it's going to make our app just a little bit more robust. So underneath our loading state here, I'm just going to create the error state, and it's just going to be a Boolean. So we're going to say use state false, and we're just going to use a Boolean here because we can just put the string in ourselves in the error message. So inside of our catch block, in the handleCreatePost function, we just need to set error to be true if an error does occur. And we're just going to come to the very bottom of our component here between these two outermost flex boxes, and we're going to check if there is an error. And if there is an error, we are going to display some component, and that component is going to be an alert component from Chakra UI. So Chakra makes it super easy to place these really nice looking alerts here. So we're just going to come to the alert docs and grab this one here. Then we can just paste it in here like this, add all of the missing imports. Okay, and we can save this and see what this looks like. And we will just make this true so we can see it. Okay, so that looks kind of not good. So we're just going to get rid of this close button. We don't really need that. We don't really need this description. And I'm just going to make this regular text from Chakra. And this is going to just say error creating post. Perfect. So that looks pretty good. And that is all we have to do. So let's change this back to error. And yeah, now we are covered for errors for creating a post. So now we're going to go back to the community page. So let's go to that index community ID page, and we're going to create our second left-hand side component, which is going to be the actual posts component. And that is the component where we're going to actually go and grab all of the posts from the database and then display them on our feed for that community. And then once we can actually view posts in communities, we will then work on this drop-down menu here so that we can actually more easily navigate through communities, because right now we kind of have to go into the URL manually and go to one that exists. So let's create the actual file for that component, and that's going to go inside of our post folder here. So inside of post, I'm going to create the component posts.tsx. So this is sort of the root of the post folder. Then we're going to use our snippet. This component is going to take in a few props, and the first one is going to be the actual community data from its parent, which is the index page of the community. And this is going to be of type community. So let's import this from our communities atom. And then we're also going to take in the user ID. And this is going to need to be optional, because this is not always going to be defined, because the user does not necessarily have to be authenticated to view the posts. Okay, let's change this text to posts, and then come back to our index page here and actually bring this in from that file, just like that. And then we can pass in our community data as a prop, just like this. Perfect, so now we actually have our post there. Okay, and you know what, actually, I'm going to actually not take in this user ID as a prop, and I'm probably going to call the useAuth state hook here, but we will worry about that in a bit. So basically, what's going to happen here is once this component renders, we need to go actually fetch the posts from the database, store those posts in state, and then map through them, and then display each one. And we're going to create a separate component for each individual post. It's going to be called a post item. But for now, we can write sort of the governing logic of this component. So the main function in here is going to be called getPosts, and it's going to be asynchronous because it's going to be asynchronously talking to our database. And then we're just going to have a use effect in here that is going to run as soon as this component actually mounts. And this is where we're actually going to go and fetch those posts. So right inside of this, as soon as the component mounts, we just want to call getPosts. And we are going to create a custom hook for our post as well, because we are going to be sharing a lot of post logic between pages and components, like voting on posts and deleting posts, etc., and actually just sharing post state. So we are going to create a hook called usePosts. Let's get our posts first, and then we will worry about storing them in state and this custom hook stuff that I'm talking about. All right, so inside of our getPost function, we do want to create a try-catch block to make error handling much smoother. And then up top here, we're going to create some extra state. So we're going to have our loading state as usual. Set loading is equal to useState, and this is going to be equal to false initially. So in our error block, let's just create a log of a getPost error. We will log the error.message, and let's make this type any. And what we want to do in here is literally just get posts for this community. That is it. And this is going to be our first look at an actual database query with Firebase. If we go take a look at our post collection here, I know there's only 2 of them and they both have the same community ID, so perhaps not the best example here, but picture 100 posts in here, all from different communities. We only want to get the post documents that have a community ID that matches the community that we're currently in. By the way, we can grab that from our destructured props here, and we're going to use the query function from Firestore to do this. So let's come inside of our try block here, and let's create a new variable here called postQuery. And we're going to bring in our query function from Firestore. The first and only mandatory argument of this function is going to be a collection that we actually want to query. So let's create our collection reference using that collection Firestore function. And as usual, we need to pass this our Firestore object from client app, and the collection name that we are querying is posts. So you can see that it's happy with just that. It will just go get literally everything in this collection. But we don't want everything in this collection, so we need to pass in some query specifications here. And the first one is going to be a where clause. So we need to import where from Firestore, and we want all of the posts where community ID is equal to the community data's ID. So the parameter that we're actually interested in is going to be community ID. So the second argument is going to be our operation clause. And in our case, we want to check if the community ID is equal to some value. But there's all sorts of operations you can do in here, but we want to use the equals. We want to grab all of the documents in post where community ID is equal to communitydata.id. That is the exact set of documents that we want, And we also want to just order these documents by a certain field as well, and that field is going to be our created@ field, and the order that we want them in is descending so that they are reverse chronological. Okay, so now that we actually have a valid query built, we can pass that query to our getDocs function to get all of those documents. So we can say postdocs is equal to await getDocs, and all we need to pass this is our post query. Okay, now we want to actually extract all of the data from each of those postdocs and store them in a JavaScript object that we can actually store in our recoil state. We did something very similar with our snippets, so it's going to look very much the same. So we're going to say posts is equal to postdocs.docs, which is an array of all of the actual Firestore document objects. We want to map through all of these and extract the data and return an actual JavaScript object with each one's ID. So we can say doc.id and then spread all of the data inside of that document. And this is what we're going to actually store in our post state here. So let's log what this looks like so we can see if we are getting some data. Posts. Okay, so our use effect is working, the component is rendering, so we should be seeing this data in our console, and we are getting an error. Nice. Okay, so this is where we are going to actually create our first database index. If you remember, when I sort of did the intro on Cloud Firestore, I briefly said that indexes are a way for Firestore to actually efficiently query your data. In order to perform queries, we actually do need an index on that document. But it's extremely easy, and Firestore handles all of the heavy lifting. All we have to do is literally click on this link, and all we have to do is literally click Create Index. And it's going to have a status of building for a few minutes. It takes a few minutes for Cloud Firestore to actually do this indexing. So give this a minute, and when it is done, we will come back. All right, you guys, we are now back, and this index has a status of enabled, so we should be able to safely make queries. Okay, so let's refresh this community page and see if we can now successfully see these posts in the console. Okay, yeah, you can see them here. Let's take a look at them. So we are getting the data on the front end here, which is super cool. And so these represent all of the posts inside of this current community, Shadi's group. And now we actually have this data on the front end, and we can store this in our post state, which is going to lead into us creating this new usePosts hook that I mentioned, which is going to manage our post state for us. So inside of our hooks directory here, let's come create another one called usePosts.tsx. I love custom hooks. Like when I was first learning React, I kind of didn't really understand the point of them. And I was like, I just didn't feel like I had enough knowledge to actually build custom hooks. I just didn't understand them enough. But now I'm actually really seeing the benefit of them, just to kind of extract repeated logic. That's why I want to give you guys experience building some with this project, so you can learn how to actually know when to use a custom hook. Okay, so eventually in this hook, we're going to have about 6 or 7 state variables. The only one we need right now is our post state atom from Recoil. So we can bring that in using our use Recoil state hook. We can say post state value and set post state value is equal to use Recoil state. And we want to pass in our post state atom from atoms/postatom. I'm going to close my directory actually, so I have some more room. And if you recall, in custom hooks, we do not want to return HTML. We want to return some data and functions. So we're going to wrap all of that stuff in an object. And what's going to go in there for now is going to be that post state value as well as our set post state value. And while we're in here, I'm going to create the actual function declarations for the ones that are going to be coming, so that you can kind of maybe understand why we're creating this hook in the first place. So the first function that's going to be in here is going to be the onVote function. That's going to be used when we actually vote on posts. Another one is going to be on select posts, when we actually click on a post and go into single page view. And then another one is going to be const on delete post. This is going to be asynchronous. Okay, and the entire reason we created this custom hook is because we are going to need this data and this functionality across multiple pages and components. So hopefully that provides some clarification if you were confused. Let's come back to our post component, and we can bring in that data now from our usePosts hook by calling it just like this. And the data we want to bring in for this component right now is our post state value as well as set post state value, just like this. So let's store these posts in our recoil state, and we can do that with our set post state value function. And we can take the previous value of post state and spread it, because we only want to update a single field, and that field is going to be posts. and our updated value of post is going to be the above posts, and we're going to typecast them to an array of posts. And we can import this type from our Atom file, just like this. So now we're actually going to have access to our posts via this post state value. All right, you guys, now that our posts are inside of our Recoil Atom, we can now create our PostItem component and actually start displaying these posts on the UI. So inside of our post folder, I'm going to create another component called PostItem.tsx and use our snippet. All right, you guys, I'm going to start by declaring all of the props that we're going to take in to this component because I think it will help make the building out of the HTML a lot more clear and intuitive. All right, so the very first prop and the most important prop that this thing is going to accept is going to be the post itself. So let's bring that in and make sure you import the type from our PostItem file. The second prop I'm going to take in is going to be called user_is_creator. And this is going to be a Boolean which represents if the currently signed in user actually created this post and is the owner. Because if they are, we're going to allow them to do certain things like delete it. The next prop we're going to take in is going to be the current user's vote value on this post. Have they voted on this post? And if they have, was it an upvote or a downvote? And we're making this optional here because it's only going to exist if this particular user has actually voted on this particular post. And we are also going to take in the functions from our usePostState hook because our parent, which is post, is going to grab those functions from the hook and then pass them to this component. And I'm going to just declare their types as empty callback functions for now. We're going to come back to these and specify the type definitions once we actually are passing them in, but for right now we are not. So I'm just going to declare them as empty. So we have our onDeletePost, and we're also going to have our onSelectPost, just like this. Okay, we can come down here to our component and actually destructure our props to grab them. User vote value, onVote, onDeletePost, and then onSelectPost. Awesome. I'm just going to close my directory so we have some more room there. Now what I'm going to do is paste in all of the icon imports from React Icons for this component because there's quite a few, and this is going to be the icons that we are seeing for like the voting, the upvoting, the downvoting, and all of these like messaging and sharing and saving icons. There are quite a few icons in this component, so I'm just going to import those from my repo. I will put a link to the this component in the description so you can directly access it, but these are them here, lines 3 to 13. Okay, with all of our props passed, let's come down here and actually start building out the UI for this component here. So the outermost container of our post is going to be a flexbox from Chakra, and this is going to have a border of 1 pixel solid and a background of white. And just so we can see actually what we're doing here as we're creating it, I'm going to render the post.title text here and then come back to our post parent here. And inside of this div, I'm going to just remove this actually and create a fragment. And then inside of this fragment, I'm going to map through all of the posts and return for each one a post item. Let's do postStateValue.posts.map. And then we want to take each post item inside of that array and create a PostItem component for each one. And this is complaining because we are not passing it the required props. So let's pass in all of the required props, and we will need to bring in those onVote and onDelete functions from our usePost hook. And I believe I did not actually put that inside of the return object here. So inside of here, I'm just going to add onVote, onSelectPost, and onDeletePost so that we can actually access them from our hook. So let's go back to posts. And inside of here, let's grab onVote, onDeletePost, and onSelectPost. Awesome. Now down here, we have everything we need to satisfy TypeScript here. So post is going to be equal to the current item we are iterating through. The next one for user_is_creator, we need to check, does the current user's ID match the creator ID on the post item? So we're going to need to actually bring in our user here. And if you remember, I kind of mentioned that before with this useAuthState hook. So we're going to bring them in. Const user is equal to useAuthState auth. Now we can check. Okay, well, does this user's UID equal to this post item's creator ID? And so this is going to be a Boolean, again, that represents whether or not the currently logged in user is the owner of this post. User vote value is going to tie in to that voting functionality, which we do not currently have. So I'm just going to hard code this as undefined because that is what the value is actually going to be if they have not voted on the post. So we're going to sort of mimic that. The next prop is going to be our onVote function. OnVote is equal to onVote, on select post is going to be equal to on select post. And lastly, on delete post is equal to on delete post. And this is complaining here. Type void is not assignable to type. Oh, okay. So for our on select post function, we do need to specify that it is returning void. The reason we don't for the other ones is because we declared them as asynchronous. And when you have an asynchronous function, you don't necessarily need to specify the return type. Okay, so that is happy now, and we actually are seeing data show up on our screen here. So our PostItem component is working. I'm actually going to change this fragment to be a stack from Chakra so that it nicely spaces them out for us by default, and we don't have to apply any extra margin on the post items. The stack will handle that for us. So let's come back to our post item and continue on with the styling. Okay, so on this outermost flex container, we're going to add a border color of gray 300, as well as a border radius of 4. All right, and let's apply some hover styling with our hover pseudo class. We can say hover, the border color we want to be gray 500. All right, and we want to apply a cursor of pointer because they are clickable items. And then we can add our onClick function here, which is going to call that onSelectPost, which currently does nothing, but we will put it here anyway. Okay, so let's go take a look at a post item inside of our demo here to kind of look at the overall structure of this thing. So this entire thing is represented by this flex box that we just created here. And inside of that flex box, we can see that there is a left-hand side column, this kind of gray background thing with the voting buttons in here. And then on the right-hand side, we actually have a majority of the post content. So from a high level, we really only have 3 major containers here. And I just wanted to show you that so that writing out the HTML is a bit more intuitive. So our first child of this flex box is going to be another flex box, which is going to represent that gray voting column. So we're going to make the direction of this column, and we're going to make the align equal to center, so it's nice and centered. And we want to give this a background of gray 100. We want to apply some padding of 2 and a width of 40 pixels. Okay, so we can kind of see that show up on the UI over there. Then lastly, we want border radius of 4. Okay, so then inside of here, we're essentially going to have 2 icons, the upvote and the downvote icon, and the actual text for the vote status on this post. So we can create our first icon here. So icon, make sure that comes in from Chakra. And the icon we want to display here is actually going to be conditional as well, depending on if the user has upvoted or downvoted this post. Okay, so we can use that user vote value and we can check, does it equal to 1, meaning that they have upvoted this post? If it does, we want to show sort of a filled orange icon, right? Like if we go to the demo here, if I click on this, you can see that it does change to a more filled icon. So if they have indeed upvoted this post, we want to show arrow, up, circle, sharp. I don't know why I'm not getting autocomplete. That's kind of annoying to type that entire thing out. Okay, and if they have not voted on this post, we want to just show arrow, up, circle, outline. And the color of this icon is also going to change depending on if the user has upvoted this post. So if the user vote value is equal to 1, we're going to make the color of the icon that orange Reddit color, brand 100. If they have not, we want it to be gray 400. All right, we're going to make this a bit bigger, so we're going to say font size is going to be 22. And then when the user actually clicks on this icon, we want to call our onVote function. Underneath here is going to be just a piece of text that shows the vote status of this post. So we can say post.voteStatus. And these posts have not been voted on, so it is currently 0. And all we want to do to this text is just make it slightly smaller, so we'll say 9 point. Okay, now underneath this, we're going to have another icon, which is going to be our downvote icon. So I'm just going to copy the upvote one and come up here. For the downvote, we want to check, does the user vote value equal -1, meaning that the user has downvoted this post? If they have, we want to show IO, arrow, down, circle, sharp. Okay, the autocomplete is now working, which is super nice. And if they have not downvoted this thing, we want to just show IO, circle, outline. If I just change this to like true, so we can see that that thing is sort of filled in now. And we haven't applied the color yet, but I just wanted to show how the icon actually changes depending on what the user vote value is. All right, our color, again, we're going to check, have they downvoted this thing? If they have, we want it to be this hex code 4379FF, which is the color I found that most closely resembles the downvote color on Reddit. Then we just want gray 400 if they have not voted, if they have not downvoted. And actually on both of these, I'm just going to add the cursor of pointer. I forgot that on the upvote one. Okay, awesome. So this is looking pretty good. Let's keep going. All right, so we are done with the left-hand side voting container. So let's just get rid of this title here, and we're going to start working on the right-hand side of this component, which is going to be most of the other post content. So we're going to give this a direction of column, as well as a width of 100%. And then inside of here, we're going to add another stack, and this is just going to, again, evenly space everything that's going to go inside of here. We're going to give this a spacing of 1, and then padding of 10 pixels. So inside of this vertical stack, we're going to actually have a horizontal stack, and this is going to contain that text that says posted by, and then the username that posted this, and then the community icon if it exists. So we're going to make the direction of this row, and we want to make the spacing equal to 0.6, and we want a line to be center, so everything is centered vertically, and then we want to make the font size of everything in here 9 point. Okay, so the first item inside of this horizontal stack is actually going to be the community icon here. However, we can see that this only is there when we're on the home page of Reddit. If we actually go into a community, that icon is no longer there because they all belong to the same community. We don't really need to uniquely identify it like that. So we're going to add a condition here in the stack that's going to basically check if we are on the home page or not. We're going to come back to this when we actually build out the home page. It's a very simple addition, but I'm just going to put a comment in here for now. We are going to do a check if we're on the home page, and if we are, we want to actually display the icon of the community that this post is part of. But for now, we are sort of building the in-community version of this, so there is no icon. The next component then would just be simply the text. So this is where that actual posted by username is going to go. And if you remember, we stored the author's user display text on the post. We can say post.creator display name. So let's come back to our app so we can see what we're doing here. And you can see that my username is actually showing up there because I created both of these posts. And in addition to this, we're actually going to say when this was posted, like posted by Shad Merhi 10 days ago or 2 minutes ago. We want to show the actual time that it was posted, right? And in order to do that, we're going to use a library called moment. So just go to npm moment, and we can basically pass this a date of any kind, and it will basically format it in a very nice, human readable way. Very popular library. You can see it has 17 million weekly downloads. So very heavily used, and it's going to make our app display very accurate and human readable times for our users to see. So we're going to install that. Okay, then once that's done, the text we want to display next to the username, we're going to need some JavaScript because we're going to call a function from that library, and that function is going to be called moment. So we're going to import moment from moment. So the argument to this thing is going to be a date. So we're going to say new date, and the date that we want to pass it is going to be our posts.createdAt.seconds, because if you recall, the type of this is actually a timestamp, and the timestamp is not a date, but the timestamp does contain a seconds parameter on it that can be used to create a date. Okay, then we need to actually multiply the seconds by 1,000 here, and then we can actually call a function on this called from now, and that is going to format the date as in like X amount of time from now. So 18 hours ago. So very cool. I think this is awesome. I love moment. Okay, so TypeScript is not happy here, and you can see that it's saying that the object is possibly undefined, and by object, it's referring to the created@at parameter on the post. The reason it is complaining about that is because if you recall in our post atom, I actually made the created@at thing optional, which means it could be undefined. And I actually realized that we do not need to do this. It is always going to be there. So I'm just going to remove that question mark, save this, and that should make this happy. And so my apologies about that. I initially thought that it was going to be an optional parameter. Okay, so we are done with this inner horizontal stack. So let's come outside of that, but still inside of our vertical stack here. And we want to actually put the post title in here now. We are ready for the post title. Awesome. Inside of a text component, we're going to actually use post.title. Okay, we're going to make the font size of this equal to 12 point, and the font weight, we're going to make it heavy. We're going to make it 600. Whoops. Font weight. All right, so underneath this title text is where we're actually going to display our post image. Okay, so let's write a condition to check that it exists. So we will say post.imageURL. If this does exist, let's show some component. And that component is going to be an image, and the container of our image is going to be a flex container. Okay, and we're going to make the justify of this equal to center, as well as the align here, and then we're going to give this a padding of 2. And inside of here, we're actually going to have our post image. So bring in image from Chakra, and our source for this image is going to be the post.image URL. Awesome. So if I save this, we can see that the post is actually there. How cool is that? But we want to set a max height on this image to prevent it from taking up too much room if it's a very large image. So we'll set a max height of 460 pixels, and we're just going to add an alt key, which is typically used for images, and we're just going to say post image. Just some alternate text if the image for some reason is not available. And actually, I forgot a really important piece. Just above the image here, we do want to add our post body. That's also another really important thing. Post.body, just like that. And we're going to change the size of this as well to be a font size of 10. Perfect. So this is looking more and more like Reddit by the second. Okay, so now we are done with this vertical stack here. We can come outside of that, still inside of our flex column here though, and we're going to put in the container for kind of the post footer there, where we have all those icons and user actions where they can share the post, delete the post, etc., and comment on the post. So let's come down here. Okay, so the container for this is going to have a margin left of 1. It's going to have a margin bottom of 0.5, and it's going to have a color gray 50. And we're going to give this a font weight of 600. So everything inside of here is going to have the font weight of 600. Okay, so then essentially we just have a series of basically icons with accompanied text. We have icon, text, right? Each little thing has an icon and a piece of text. So each icon is going to have its own flex container. So we can create our first one by saying icon, and this icon container, we're going to give it an align of center, a padding of a padding of 8 pixels top bottom, 10 pixels left right, and a border radius of 4. Okay, and on hover, we want the background color to be gray 200. And then lastly, just make our cursor a pointer. Perfect, just like that. So if I hover over this thing, we can see that it has that sort of gray background there. Okay, so this first icon is going to be the comment icon, which is going to be BS chat. And we're going to give this a margin right of 2. And right next to the comment icon, we actually want to display the number of comments that this post has. So we're going to say post.number of comments. And then we can give this a font size of 9 point. There we go. Okay, and actually I decided to remove this font weight of 600 here. You can leave it if you choose. I just think it looks a bit cleaner if the text is a bit lighter. Okay, perfect. So now what I'm going to do is just copy this and clone it downward for the other icons. And this second icon is going to be our IO arrow redo outline, which is sort of the share icon. So inside of this text here, we want to say share. Then the last icon down here is going to be the save icon. So we're going to say IO bookmark outline. And we want to display the text save. Awesome. How good is this looking? This is so cool. And I love how the number of comments is actually dynamic. So every time a comment is created, this is actually an accurate number. And actually, we are missing one icon here, and that icon is going to be the delete icon. But we only want to show this if the user is the creator. We do not want to give anyone the option to delete any post. Only if you are the owner of this post, you can see this button here. And this icon is going to be the AI outline delete, and it's going to say delete. Okay, and the on click for the container of this delete icon is going to be the on delete post. Okay, so we are completely done building out the UI for the PostItem component. And the only thing that's going to change actually is this homepage check that I was talking to before, where if we see them on the homepage, it just displays the community icon. But that's very minor. Okay, perfect. So now that we can actually create posts and view them on our page, let's go try creating one in the submit page and then actually have it redirect us back to this page and see what happens. And I just want to make sure that we actually did implement the router. We did not. Okay, so I'm just going to uncomment this so that when we do create a post successfully, it is going to route us back to the page. And actually, we really only want to do this when the post has been successfully created. If an error occurs, we don't really want to reroute the user, only in the successful case. So I'm going to move this up into the try block of the try catch. Okay, so let's actually go try creating a post and seeing what happens. So let's create the title of I love Chakra UI. And the text is going to be UIs made easy with Chakra. Awesome. Let's go add an image here. Okay, and the only other image I have here is is this image of me I'm using for the thumbnail here. So let's use this one, and we'll come back to the post, and I'm actually going to change this to "Am I good at photoshopping?" And then the description is going to be no. Okay, I'm going to tell myself no. So I'm going to click post, and let's see what happens. So we are redirected back to the page, and then it fetches the post from the database, and we can see it as soon as we post it. How cool is that? I think that's really cool. And one last thing I'm going to very quickly add is going to be our PostLoader component, which displays those sort of skeleton components when the posts are being loaded from the database. So inside of our post folder here, I'm going to create a new file called postloader.tsx. And I'm going to use our snippet here. And Chakra makes doing something like this so easy. They have this component called skeleton. So let's go see what this looks like, Chakra skeleton. And you can basically create any shape you want of this like skeleton loader component. And so you can kind of build it out to look exactly like your component. And I think these are cool. I think these really, really, really improve user experience. Like when I'm on a website like Airbnb or something, and I see these loaders, it honestly just makes the app feel better rather than just like seeing nothing or some like spinner. Spinners are good too, but I really like these skeleton components. I think they're fun. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste in my loader from my completed project, just because it's only like 15 lines, and it's just basically something that's really easy to copy and paste. So I'm going to put this in here like this. Just add all missing imports. And I will put the link for this in the description so you can just quickly grab it, but very simple component. And all we need to do to use this component is come back to our posts component. I'm going to close my directory here. And inside of the return statement of our post.tsx file, I'm going to create a outermost fragment and wrap everything in the fragment. And the reason I'm doing that is so I can add some JavaScript in here. What I want to add in here is check if loading is true. And if loading is true, I want to show our post loader. And for some reason, it's not importing. There we go. Okay, and if we are not loading, then let's show the actual post content. So we'll move the stack inside of here just like this. Okay, so now if we come back, and if I just make this true for a sec, we can see what this looks like. So you can see that I created these components using the skeletons from Chakra to make this really nice looking loader. And honestly, I just get so fired up about these loaders. I just think they look so cool. And they really do improve user experience. So anyway, we can actually check if loading is true using the real loading. So now if I save this and I reload, I actually don't know if we're setting loading to be true. I don't think we are. No, we're not. Okay, so inside of our try block here, I'm just going to set loading to be true. And then at the very end, just set loading to be false. Awesome, so you saw for a second there that it actually was loading. Let's do this again. Cool, so I think that's amazing. All right, and we just need to add a key to our post item here to prevent that console error we are seeing on the right-hand side over here. So I'm just going to make the key the unique ID of this post. And also we can actually improve our image loading state, because if you see there, if I just refresh, it loads the post, but then for another second after, the image is still kind of loading. And that can be improved with just a simple additional state variable inside of our post item. So let's quickly add that. It's just going to be a few lines. So up top here, we can create a state variable. So basically for each post item, we can add a state called loading image and set loading image. And we can initialize it as true because initially the image is going to be loading. And for posts that don't have images, this doesn't even matter. It's just kind of a redundant state variable. But if we come down here to the container of our image, and inside of this container, we can add a condition to check to see if loading image is true. And if it is, we want to show one of our skeleton components. So we can say skeleton, and we want to make the height of this 200 pixels, the width 100%, and the border radius 4. And this is basically just going to mimic the shape of an image if the image is kind of loading. And this is not the same loading as loading from the database. This is like the posts have been loaded from the database, but the image is just sort of in the process of still rendering. And this will make sense when we see it in the app here. Okay, so if we save that, we can see that there is this sort of loader beside the image here, but we don't want to display that all the time. Obviously, that looks kind of weird. So on our image component, there is a property called onLoad, and this is going to trigger when this image has actually successfully loaded. So we can call our set loading image function and just set it equal to false, just like this. Okay, and since the updating of state is asynchronous, we can hide this image to actually prevent the image from being shown at all until that state variable has updated as well, so that there's no sort of flash of both of these two things appearing. Okay, so if we save this, and then if we refresh, this is how it behaves. Awesome. So it's just a bit cleaner, and it kind of signifies to the user that there is something being loaded into the image. Awesome, guys. So that is it for our PostItem component, other than those few minor things with the whole homepage icon thing. And now we can create posts in communities and actually view them. The next step is going to be to actually implement the voting functionality and the commenting functionality. So we are making solid progress. All right, you guys, I think I'm going to leave it there for part 4. We have covered so much in this video. We got a lot of our key features built here. We are able to join and leave communities. We're able to actually create posts in those communities, and we got to look at how to actually upload image and media content to our Firebase storage. And we got a look at how to build our own custom React hooks. In the next part, we're going to be covering how to vote on posts and how to comment on posts, and then the deleting of posts as well. And then we'll wrap up some loose ends like the about community component and just all the other missing pieces like the top communities component on the homepage here. I'm going to try to finish it in the next part, and that should be coming in a few days. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this content. I really appreciate it. And please join the Discord as well. Link is in the description. I would love to see you in there. And I will see you in part 5, which should be coming in a few days.